Welcome to the Unlist. This is not going to be a very happy video this time, but this is a video on the house of Estee Lauder, which is a house that for a long time a lot of people in the online fragrance community, especially if they were vintage enthusiasts, were very fond of, because Estee Lauder was one of the brands that sort of held fast against the corporate race to the bottom. For a long time, they held fast against reformulating things for cost or changing things to make them more palatable to younger or more mainstream audiences. They really stuck to their guns in a similar way to what Chanel does and Hermes do, where they don't necessarily reinvent classic fragrances or styles, but rather let them become classic styles through their solidarity by maintaining them in the best possible way they can outside of required reformulations because of materials restrictions and all that. One of the brands that people could say when they did reformulate something, they didn't cut corners. And similar with their packaging, the Estee Lauder fragrances like Chanel, like Hermes, if packaging did change, it changed in a way that the product looked recognizable to what it was before in the old bottle. So the sense of brand identity for Estee Lauder for a long time was very strong, and you could trust that when you bought one of their products, especially a newer bottle of an older product, that you were going to get something that met your expectations. And there were very few instances where the real hardline gatekeeper types who aren't satisfied with anything except for the very year one, month one, week one, day one, hour one, second one, zero bottles, right? Like the very first bottles that come off the assembly line are the only ones they accept. Anything sold on the second day of the first week or the second hour of the first day is considered a shadow of its former self, right? That whole thing is just nuts anyway, and those people generally have something wrong with them, in my opinion. So, and it's not about the fragrance at that point, it's about something else, and I don't want to get into that too much because that veers off into a much different area of conversation than perfume. So we get socio-political on that one, really. It's about more of a worldview that they're defending with their extreme views on vintage fragrances and what they represent and blah, 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 blah. We're not breaking that down today. I think I've already done that enough in other videos anyway, so let's not do that again. Point is, though, Estee Lauder is a house that for a long time had a good reputation among collectors. Like I said, older enthusiasts, younger enthusiasts, people who enjoyed the classics, people who enjoyed their more recent things through divisions like Tom Ford and Frederick Malle. There was really something for everyone with Estee Lauder, okay? If you were a fan of more modern, more chic fragrances, Estee Lauder had you covered. If you were a fan of more upscale, niche offerings, luxury offerings, Estee Lauder had you covered. Trend and fashion-oriented things, again, you want to be on trend, Estee Lauder probably had a brand or a fragrance that could meet those requirements. And if you were a fan of the classics, the vintage stuff from the 50s, the 60s, 70s, the powerhouse 80s stuff, you wanted the oak moss, you wanted the animalics, you wanted the big, heavy, aromatic things, then, as I already said, they basically had you covered. There was something for everyone, and they had integrity. But sadly, that is not the case. And most of my videos about houses, I usually don't preface them with something like the death of the house. Usually it's just the Unlist and then Caron or Hermes or whatever the brand I'm doing, right? But I can't really do that with Estee Lauder. I can't in good conscience not comment on their sudden rapid decline. It's not a slow decline, guys. Like I said, for a long time they were very much held in high regard. But literally within the last 5 years or so, we have watched them just about reverse course on everything. Everything that made them great. Literally everything that made them great, they reversed course on, threw it all away, and now they are chasing the same fast fashion, race to the bottom, lowest cost, highest profit margin, bullshit, perfume market that has LVMH and Kering and L'Oreal and Coty and all those big conglomerates chomping at the bit. The same thing that makes everyone talk constant shit about LVMH and talk constant shit about how bad they are and how bad L'Oreal is and how bad Coty is and all that stuff. Well, Estee Lauder is right there with them now. They have just masks off, guys, right? They are in their villain arc. Estee Lauder has fully gone into its villain arc, and it is taking everything you've ever loved about them, everything you've ever loved about the brand, and all of the labels that were under the brand too, including Frederic Malle, including Tom Ford, including Le Labo, including all of these brands, Joe Malone, and just ravaging everything, cheapening everything, discontinuing everything, recomposing everything, and relaunching it at price points double or triple what they were before. Like literally every most ghoulish, greedy, shallow, short-sighted, corporate, oligarchical, assholery decision that you think a brand could make, Estee Lauder is making them all, and they're making them all at once. It's not even like I said, it's not like a slow decline. It's not like a rolling change year after year. It's just literally off a fucking cliff. It's just, and it's actually impressive at how much of a train wreck it is. But they have shareholders, I guess, they have to please. They have other financial interests, investors. They have people pulling strings, and they want money, and they want money now. So they are desperate and doing everything they can and grasping at straws to get that money. And if they think throwing the entire brand away, its legacy away, destroying everything it ever was, and chasing the short-term, fast fashion, exploitative business model, they think that going full L'Oreal or full LVMH is the way to do it, right? If they think that's going to give them the ROI, the return on investment, for those who don't know what that means, they think doing all that horrible stuff and forsaking all of their fans, forsaking all of their long-term enthusiasts, if they think biting the hand that feeds and doing a traitorous move like this is going to keep them solvent, I guess, keep them in business, then fine. I mean, we've seen other businesses basically do that, right? We've seen brands like Ford and GM get rid of basically all cars and only sell trucks. So we've seen other strange things like that where a complete business model was tossed aside and a whole new one was erected and put in its place, right? We've seen it before. So it's kind of weird, though. To me, it would be like watching Estee Lauder do this is like watching KFC decide it wants to sell cheeseburgers and get rid of its fried chicken. Like KFC just decides, we're a burger place now. We don't make chicken anymore, right? That's what's basically going on with Estee Lauder. They just flat out decided they didn't want to be Estee Lauder anymore. They wanted to be somebody else. They wanted to be the McDonald's at home version of LVMH. They wanted to be the Wish.com AliExpress version of L'Oreal, I guess, right? So anyway, bit of history, bit of recap before we go into more doom and gloom. Estee Lauder was a company formed by none other than Estee Lauder, okay, and it was formed way back in the immediate post-war era. So, and Estee Lauder was an immigrant. She married a Joseph Harold Lauder, which is where her name comes from. Her maiden name actually eludes me right now. I'm not sure what it was. You can go on Wikipedia if you want that. But the big thing that put her on the map perfume-wise was Youth Dew, a fragrance launched in 1947. It was the first, the debut fragrance from Estee Lauder, and it actually launched as a bath oil before a perfume. For those of you who want to be very pedantic about historical details, Youth Dew was a wearable bath oil. It was a bath oil that you could also put on your skin and use as scent. And the popularity of doing so is eventually what led to it being launched as a proper perfume. And it was composed by a legendary perfumer named Josephine Catapano, who worked for IFF. And the thing about Youth Dew, the advertising for it was very scandalous, was very sexually charged. It was a naughty homemaker's perfume, effectively. It was pitched in a way that was, this is the naughty, sexed up thing that you wear when your husband's away or whatever, and you indulge in it, and it's like it makes you feel virile and whatever else. And what's funny about that is, I mean, this was right after World War II ended, so a lot of women were already taking on very sort of charged masculine roles anyway that were previously reserved to men. They were working in factories, they were driving cars more often, they were doing things around the house, you know, they were doing things because all the guys were all fighting World War II, and that didn't immediately stop. You know, in 1945, when a lot of American GIs returned home, it wasn't like women just went back in the kitchen. Once you let that cat out of the bag, right, you can't put it back in. That's Pandora's box right there. So for a while, it was very popular to make what I call fragrances that were very butch. It's a term I use. It's a LGBTQIA plus term. It's a queer term. Butch, right? It refers to typically lesbians that are more masculine in the way they carry themselves. But it's become a more broad term now as the years have softened the term. But effectively, it's just a more masculine approach to feminine style, effectively, you know. Could be wrong. There could be other definitions that are more broad than that even. I'm just going off of my knowledge of hearing the term used in conversation. And I'm not Webster's, I'm not Oxford, okay, so don't hold me to that. But generally, when you refer to somebody being butch, it's usually not a guy. It's usually a woman referred to as being butch. So a lot of the men's fragrances of the time were very powdery, very soft, very vanillic, sort of carryover from barbershop tropes. But then the women's fragrances got very dry, leathery, very animalic, very musky, very green, full of things like stearyl acetate and galbanum and isobutyquinoline, aka pyrrolone. So leather notes, big green notes, civet, the very popular Animalis base. So there are two different Animalis bases, by the way, but that's subject for another day. That's a different video right there. But the Animalis base was a combined animalic musky base that also had woody facets as well. And it was very popular to put in fragrances as a pre-made base. I mention this because Youth Dew has it. Youth Dew has it, so does the later Kouros by Yves Saint Laurent. The fragrance that everyone goes crazy for in the online community and everyone says contains civet. There is not a single fucking drop of civet in Kouros, never has been. It's always been Animalis base. But everyone who goes, oh, the civet. It's like, I get like an eye twitch reaction when I hear that. And I just want to reach out like a pimp and backhand people. Because I will literally tell them it's Animalis. And then the very next minute they're saying civet again. Like, do you not listen to me? You know, the words that come out of my mouth. I mean, is it just like Charlie Brown's teacher? Wah, 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 wah. I mean, I don't know. People live in their own world anyway, so I guess can't entirely blame them for that. But back to Estee Lauder. Youth Dew was a very successful fragrance, and it followed a very similar trope to things like Taboo and Shocking by Schiaparelli and Bondi by Robert Piguet. Fragrances with naughty names. You had a fragrance called Scandal, not the Rajadov one. So I think that was a Lanvin fragrance, actually, the original Scandal. But names that had this sort of just salacious quality to them, right? Lecherous quality to them in some ways. So they felt inappropriate. And Youth Dew has obvious connotations to it as well. I don't need to tell you that. But very successful. And it quickly moved on from a bath oil to a full cologne. And then there was a parfum, a concentrated little parfum bottle you could get. And then face powder and skin creams and you name it. It's 101 different ways you can Youth Dew. Okay, you pick the way you want to do it. And the fragrance itself was very much based on Sheep de Coty. So if you like your aromatic, floral, classic sheeps, not the light watercolory ones like Mitsoko, but the greener ones, more focused on rose and patchouli. So Sheep de Coty was more of a heavier sort of thing. If that's the way you like your sheeps, if you like them like that, then Youth Dew was basically taking that a step further. And it took it a step further with the heavy animalic, with amber. There's a very big amber accord in Youth Dew, which some say qualifies it to be more of an oriental, if you want to use that term, or amber perfume, if you want to use the Michael Edwards terminology. I don't care. I'm not despite what folks say to me or accuse me of, I am not the adjective police. If you want to call it an amber or you want to call it an oriental, I'm not going to crucify you either way. I don't really give a shit. But people call it that. They also call it a sheep. I kind of think it's in the middle, honestly. It's sort of a hybrid. If you want to say floriental or some portmanteau like that, go right ahead. But it was very popular. And then Estee Lauder, who was already doing makeup, because they started off as makeup before perfume. They kind of did the thing that Lancôme did, but in reverse. Lancôme started off as perfume, and then became more well-known for their makeup, and then moved into cosmetics with perfume as an aside. Estee Lauder did the exact flip of that. They were makeup first, and then perfume came out later, but the perfume became so popular that the makeup for a while became an aside. It was still there, but then they went into skincare. And skincare became the big breadwinner for them. So then both the makeup and the perfume was pushed aside, and the skincare became the thing, the anti-aging creams, the wrinkle creams, the different treatments, the face masks, this, that, and the other. Those who've been to an Estee Lauder counter, you don't need me to tell you, you already know, right? It's all about the skincare and trying to stay young forever without getting plastic surgery and looking like an alien, right? Going like that. So, trying to do it without going under the knife and becoming like a nightmare. Like something out of Hellraiser, right? That's the more expensive way to do it, is to make yourself look like that thing from Hellraiser that has his face stretched like this. It goes like that or whatever, chitters the teeth. Anyhow, getting back on point here. So Estee Lauder, in the mid-century, really kind of became like America's answer to Chanel and brands like that. Because Chanel, and to an extent Dior at that time, very elegant, but somewhat reserved. Perfumes were still strong because everyone smoked. Car exhaust didn't have catalytic converters on it yet, so a lot of pollution in the air. So perfumes were strong, but Americans have always had bigger, bolder, more ostentatious tastes in perfume. things that operate in broad strokes rather than filigree and finesse. And Estee Lauder delivered that. Their perfumes were basically just taking what the French were doing, right? Taking what Chanel was doing and Givenchy and Balenciaga at that time. Lanvin also could be included in the conversation. Taking what they were doing and putting football padding on it, giving it a helmet and a teeth guard and a jock strap and saying, go out there and tackle someone. So big, beefy American football, basically, version of French perfume. And that's kind of what Estee Lauder was doing. And while people in Europe didn't necessarily appreciate that, people in America loved it because it was for us, by us, right? Like the brand Fubu, for us, by us. So New York, Los Angeles, all around the U.S., Estee Lauder became a big deal. In Europe, they never quite had the same market. Like I said, Europe likes their traditional French brands. They like their classics. They tend to have a bit more of a condescending view on Americans. Trust me, I had to deal with one on Base Notes the other day who took a very soft mention of European history and cuisine and blew it up into this massive ad hominem attack, calling me a dumb, ignorant American. And I'm like, bro, I get all my information from encyclopedias, from history books. I can Google stuff. So if you have a problem with me saying something, then you have a problem with history. Just because it's coming out of my mouth, because I'm American, doesn't make it any less true. So the condescension kind of has kept a lot of American brands from really getting a foothold in Europe. Not so much the UK. People in the UK love Estee Lauder. Estee Lauder has been very popular over there. But the company kind of split off into different divisions into the 60s and early 70s. So first we had Aramis, a men's division launched in 1965. Originally there was a Aramis cologne by Estee Lauder released in 64, and it was sold exclusively in New York, Paris, London, places like that. Then in 65, Aramis by Estee Lauder got repackaged as Aramis by Aramis, and a whole new brand was launched. And then from there on out, it was just Aramis. Estee Lauder would still be on the box somewhere, right, bottom of the bottle, but it was no longer an Estee Lauder fragrance. It was an Aramis brand fragrance. This fragrance is very famous for being a mod of Cabochard de Grey, which is a woman's fragrance, released in 1959, about 5 years before. And Cabochard de Grey is another really butch fragrance, a very masculine smelling fragrance for women. Leather, carnation, aldehydes, heavy green notes. So I know a lot of guys who enjoy it, myself included. Aramis was effectively a retooling of that by its perfumer, Bernard Chant. I've done a video on that. You can watch. I've done a video on that perfumer. Go ahead and check it out. It snowballed from there because then we get Clinique in 1970, and Clinique is a more skincare-oriented brand because Estee Lauder wanted to kind of take back its more cosmetic and perfume approach. So they launched the Clinique brand to really be the cosmetic skincare focus rather than the makeup focus. So then Clinique had a fragrance called Aromatics Elixir, launched in 1971. Another very big famous fragrance, big heavy rose, patchouli, civet. Just a big, bold, another chypre like youth do, but with less amber this time. More focused on green notes, more focused on musk and patchouli, which also got spun off into its own Aramis fragrance in 73 called 900, which is an adaptation of Aromatics Elixir. And so it would go that a lot of fragrances released from one Estee Lauder house would get retooled and relaunched in another house. So either a man's version would spring from the women's version, or a women's version would spring from the man's version. Example of that would be the Tuscany Per Donna fragrance based on the Tuscany Per Uomo fragrance. So man's fragrance first in 84, released under the Aramis label, eventually got a woman's version later. Now that one was released in the same brand, so it also counted as an Aramis fragrance. But my point is, a lot of this hopping over the fence, very common for Estee Lauder to do that. In fact, Cinnabar was very famously a mod of Youth Dew. And eventually what happened was Youth Dew had a Cinnabar flanker and a soft Youth Dew flanker. The soft Youth Dew flanker being obviously softer. And then the Cinnabar flanker being stronger. Eventually, soft Youth Dew got rebranded as a Cinnabar flanker. Cinnabar Soft Youth Dew it was called. And then that was gotten rid of, and Cinnabar was spun off into just Cinnabar in 78, no longer part of the Youth Dew range, in an attempt to compete against Opium by Yves Saint Laurent, which Opium was famously quipped by Estee Lauder as being Youth Dew with a tassel. She didn't like that very much. She was angry. So Joseph Harold Lauder even got his own fragrance, which I've done a video on as well. That happened in 82, a year before he died. The fragrance was actually created in the 70s, and it was his bespoke custom fragrance. Estee Lauder did that. So she had her own bespoke fragrance called Private Collection that she released to the public, I think in 73, but she wore it for years just as a bespoke. So her bespoke came out a decade earlier. So his bespoke finally got launched to the public, and then he died the following year. So things kept on going, okay? Eventually, the Aramis division became responsible for making fragrances for licensed designers, right? So Aramis was its own thing for a long time, and eventually designers like Zegna and Tommy Hilfiger would hook up with Aramis perfumers, and that's where we get stuff like Z de Zegna. That's where we get Zegna Pour Uomo. We get obviously Tommy Cologne, Athletics, things like that, Tommy Girl. These were all fragrances developed by the Aramis division and then released for these designer brands. And then also, very infamously, Donald Trump would also work with the Aramis brand, Estee Lauder, and we would see the Trump, the fragrance, released in 2004 to coincide with his show The Apprentice, which actually hit the airwaves in 2004. I had the fragrance. It's really good. If you can look past politics and look past world events and just smell the fragrance for what it is, it's actually pretty good. If you can't, I understand, okay? I'm not going to say you must like this fragrance, okay? Everyone handles things differently in the world, but I'm just saying the perfume is pretty good. Put a sticker over the name if you have to, okay? And it comes in the same bottle as Lauder for Men, by the way, which came out in 85 as the first proper Estee Lauder fragrance, launched in 85. Estee Lauder had, up until that point, avoided making men's fragrances because they had Aramis, didn't need to make a proper Lauder fragrance, but with Lauder for Men, they did. They also gave a proper Clinique fragrance for men called Tailoring back in 82, 83-ish, thereabouts. Didn't sell very well, but it was followed by Chemistry in 93 and then Happy for Men in 99. So at some point, all the divisions were making fragrances for men and women both. Now, here's where it all comes crashing down. Estee Lauder has been gone for a while. The woman, she's been passed away for a while. But her house carried on rather well, to be honest. But it seems like into the 2010s and then early 2020s, we would start to see cracks in the foundation. Tom Ford signed on with Estee Lauder after being spurned by Gucci PPR, which is now Kering. He would launch his brand and release a lot of very daring, artistic perfumes, throwback fragrances to older eras, things that would gain a lot of popularity in the online fragrance community too, even though most of them would be discontinued very shortly after launch, and a lot of them cost way too much money. Then after a while, Lauder would go shopping for niche brands. They would pick up Frederic Malle, distribution for Le Labo, Joe Malone, bunch of other brands, but they would leave them alone. They would pick up distribution for them, But otherwise, Frederick Malle could do what he wanted. Jo Malone could do what she wanted. The guys from Le Labo could do what they wanted. But there came a point when that wasn't good enough anymore. There was more money to be had. So one by one, all of these founders of all these brands would quit, would cash out and leave. The founders of Le Labo would leave. Jo Malone would leave. And then Tom Ford would step down from his fashion house and leave. And then most recently, Frederick Malle would leave his own brand. That is a canary in the coal mine scenario for you right there. That is saying something. And then in 2021, they decided to shutter the Aramis division. They would keep the original fragrance, but get rid of all the other Aramis fragrances and get rid of all the brands and sell off all the licenses to let someone else make those perfumes or discontinue them. And now in the years since that has happened, we have basically watched everything Aramis become discontinued. Even the original Aramis fragrance, as of the making of this video, has been pulled from the website, and it's doubtful if it's just a stock out or reformulation or what's going on. But it looks like the actual 1965 Aramis fragrance may in fact be done. If it's not, then let's just hope it's a temporary thing. But after like 60 years, that would suck. You know? But the big travesty was when Frederick Malle, in one of his last acts before he walked off into the sunset, was he agreed to do these reformulations of all the classic Lauder fragrances, and they were all gutted. So Knowing, Azure, Alliage, all these classics, Private Collection, were all gutted, made thoroughly sheer, remade in a modern watercolor style, and then relaunched at price points that I've already mentioned were like 3 times higher than what they were. So these were $100 bottles at most, all selling for $300. So not only are they shadows of their former selves, but they're also way overpriced. So it's overpriced garbage. And the stuff the Tom Ford brand has been pumping out lately also is very suspect, since he's no longer at the wheel of that brand. And it just looks like that we're seeing Estee Lauder just metamorphosized into a undead creature of pure corporate greed, and it's actually kind of sad and frightening at the same time. So hoard all your old bottles or whatever. I'm not going to tell you to run out and buy a bunch of stuff, but just, hold on to your pants, because it looks like the end is nigh, at least for Estee Lauder. So the death of Estee Lauder as we know it, effectively. I won't say the brand is dead, but the brand we knew is dead, and whatever's left is not going to be worth looking into at all. Okay, guys, this has been the On List. Thanks for